Stoic Empathy podcast, where we explore how mastering Stoicism grants us power over ourselves and empathy empowers us to influence and connect with others. I'm Shermin Kruse, the creator of the concept of Stoic Empathy, with over 30 years of experience in empowerment and advocacy, and author of the forthcoming book, Stoic Empathy, being released in April of 2025. Some of the topics we covered during this really exceptional interview are how Marie discovered Cindy Crawford right around the time she was starting to either lead or start every major fashion agency in the city of Chicago. Personal stories of sexual assault that Marie experienced, but also that she witnessed others experience throughout her career. Trigger warning here because there is some sensitive material. Changing the modeling system after witnessing so much abuse against women and children within the industry, and how she, navigated the negative social and professional consequences of her advocacy, because change isn't always free. Acting justly sometimes has negative consequences too, and those need to be acknowledged so that we can celebrate when the person engaged in the work gets back up after every takedown. Because Marie Anderson really has been one of the people laying the foundation for the Me Too movement for decades before it was widely known. And we owe so much to her work and her courage. Let's dive into the interview with Marie P. Anderson.
Today's episode is brought to you by Nurturing Wisdom. Since 2005, Nurturing Wisdom have matched students of all ages with tutors for customized one-on-one tutoring sessions. They help students increase their scores on high school and college admissions tests and improve their academic performance. Here at Stoic Empathy, we actually have some personal experience with Nurturing Wisdom because our associate producer, Beth, she's used their services for her kids for years, ranging from test prep to academic learning in subjects like physics, Italian, AP English, and history courses, among others. Nurturing Wisdom tutors not only provide executive functioning coaching, which if you're a mom, that's amazing, but they also help kids become more confident learners who take ownership of their education. They teach strategies for physical and digital organization, so both of those, and time management, study skills, and self-advocacy. Your carefully chosen tutor can come to your home if you're in the Chicago area or meet online wherever you are in the world. Check them out by going to their website, www.nurturingwisdom.com today. All right. Well, so welcome to the Stoic Empathy podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here, my friend, Marie Anderson.
Don't forget the P.
Oh, Marie P. Anderson. Yeah,
you're right. That is the brand, girl.
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me restart.
Thank you. There's a lot of Marie Andersons in the world.
Well, there's really only one.
Thank you. From my point of view.
Yeah.
They're point twos.
I'm going to start getting letters from every other Marie Anderson in the world who doesn't have a P. And they're going to be like, what are you saying is wrong with me exactly? That's going to be great for the podcast. Well, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here. I met you through my husband, which is a really fun story. Do you want to tell our audience about the story of how you know my husband, who now, by the way, is 58?
It's crazy. He looks the same as he did when he was a teenager.
Well, I wouldn't know that, but you would. You would know that. So tell us how you know it.
The quick version is I started your wonderful husband as a teenager model in the 80s when I was the vice president of Elite Chicago. And as a result of that relationship, I also started his gorgeous mother as a model in the 80s.
Crazy. Because
so it was definitely a family affair.
Yeah, because my mother-in-law was Miss Williamsburg in the 60s and runner-up to Miss Virginia. And you started repping her when she was in her 40s, actually. And this is back in the 80s where women in their 40s could not get work. And repping her kid, who is my husband. I still have some of those
some of those modeling cards from back then. Remember when everybody used to have
comp cards?
Yeah,
comp
that's
cards.
right. Does everybody still have comp cards? Like, is that something people have in the industry?
Back then, we would literally order 5,000 composites for the models, various agencies worldwide, and for all of our client submissions. But these days, they generally don't get more than 25 comps. Because the digital world,
yeah, that's wow, it's amazing.
And it's for those rare in-person castings.
Wow.
Because so much is done, as you know, self-taping.
So much, it's true. Even a lot of the auditions are online now, which is so incredible, such a different world. But that's the least of the changes. So you came up, first of all, you discovered Cindy Crawford, which is
also in the 80s.
Also in the 80s, who, by the way, went to Northwestern with my husband. They were both in the chemical engineering program there. But Cindy did not complete the program on account of becoming a supermodel.
Yeah, it was like,
right,
what to weigh out here.
Right.
But to her defense, it was a big decision because she's very, very smart academically. And that was a very natural thing for her to evolve towards. But it just came down to she was just making too much money.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then she's one of the people who also essentially invented the idea of transitioning from a modeling career into a business career and an entrepreneurship career, which is something I know you supported as well. So you founded Cindy Crawford, which is such an interesting story. I would love for you to tell it for us a little bit. What were you doing at the time? What was your experience up to that point? And what was the modeling industry like at that time?
Okay, that's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot. I know.
I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining, but it's like, I've been doing this 40 years. So I have to, give you little sound bites. The quick version of how I started Cindy is important. I give a little backstory. I had just been a client. Before I became an agent, I was running Stan Malinowski, the fashion photographer's studio back then. And he would take me to Rome twice a year where we would shoot the Italian collections. So I would be working with Valentino and Fendi and all these other awesome clients on set. And in Europe back then in the 80s, their idea of beauty was way more diverse than America. So I would be on set yes, Brooke Shields was there, and the traditional American girls were there, but there was also a lot of dark beauties there, like Iman, if anybody's old enough to know who she is, who had married David Bowie.
I remember her. Is she Sudanese? Or
I believe so, yes.
Somali. I can't remember if she's Sudanese or Somali.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember her from the 80s. She was the only, she's Somali. She is. And actually, my sister spent 2 years living in Somalia recently. And man, they all look like that. They're just like the most gorgeous people. They're all just incredibly beautiful.
So being exposed to that eye, meaning that casting eye of working with Iman, Beverly Johnson, Dama, Apollonia. These were all girls that weren't necessary household names, but they were the muses of a lot of the haute couture designers. And that's what we were shooting back then. So the point is that working for Stan, we spent a lot of time in Europe shooting more diversified beauties. So when we would come back to America, like we would go to New York and shoot a cover of Vogue, it would be Kim Alexis on the cover.
Yeah.
And then we would come back to Chicago and shoot a week of Sears, where the bulk of the models were like curvy models. What's that? They barely existed. African-American models, very rarely. Asian, forget about it, very rare. Like it was 80s. So white.
I mean,
so
we're
Caucasian.
talking about half a century ago.
Yes.
So
the point being, once I left being a client and I became an agent or booker for Stewart Talent, I was interviewing a representation as a makeup artist. And I was going through his book and I completely forgot what his purpose was because I saw this picture of what was then Cynthia Crawford in his book. And I said, oh my gosh, this girl is beautiful. Can I have her? Like, I want to represent her. And he said, she's already been rejected by all the agencies because the beauty mark, the dark circles underneath her eyes. She's just a little too exotic for America. I said, I don't care. I need you to help me find her. So with the help of Scott Weimer, who actually shot the photo, and George doing hair makeup, they helped me track down Cindy. And then just explaining to Cindy over the phone that I was not going to bring her from DeKalb, drive through all the construction to come to Chicago only for me to reject her. Yeah. I was asking her to come, like, I wanted to represent her just on that one photo because she was so exotic and interesting. And the dark circles underneath the eyes, that's just a photographer knowing how to light. And the beauty mark over her lip is like, so what?
Right.
to me, it was just all about beauty.
Uniquely identifying, right?
Yes.
So you discover her, she becomes an international sensation.
Yes.
And a lot of things have changed about standards of beauty since then. Of course, right. Thank God. Yeah, that's right. But it's important to note that there have been people fighting for those changes for these last 4 or 5 decades. And a lot of them are the people that have been boots on the ground from the beginning, way back when things weren't, when, Iman and Apollonia are the only two, you know what I mean? I mean, there are just not a lot of other names, and certainly very few in America, very few. Yeah. So what happened to you then? You discovered Cindy, and then you went on to lead a couple of modeling agencies, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I've either owned or run every top fashion agency in Chicago, so I'm going to try to compress 40 years. So as far as Cindy, that was at Stewart Talent, and it was a year later that Jane Stewart would merge with John Casablancas, and we would become Elite Chicago.
Right.
So I would go from being the booker to the director to the vice president. I wrote my first book on how to become a model with Cindy on the cover during that era. And I'm in the middle of writing my autobiography, and I was really amazed to see this of myself, that there were a lot more Vogue cover girls that I had either found or started or discovered. There's a explanation for those varying degrees of how an agent acquires a model. But as I've been writing my autobiography and finding all these old Vogue covers, I'm like, dang, Cindy Crawford was certainly the biggest one out of all of them, but I have 8 Vogue cover girls from the 80s. And as I've been acquiring these, I'm like, dang, I accomplished a lot. And I was by the time I left Elite, I was 28.
Incredible.
And I did all of that from Chicago.
Not New York, not LA.
Right.
Not Milan.
And I have a lot of gratitude for Stan Malinowski teaching me the business of beauty and how to scout and how to develop models. So do you want me to continue to go agency to agency?
No, what I would love, I know you went on to then start Aria, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, 50 other ones since then. I don't know, one leader after another. I would love to talk a little bit, and feel free to put in the context as we're talking about it, where you were at the time, et cetera. I would love to feel the context of what it was like in the 80s and the 90s, being a leader in the modeling industry at a time when being a young woman in the industry was so difficult
and challenging and sometimes even unsafe. And how you coped with that. You know, this is the Stoic Empathy podcast. And one of the things I've always been really fascinated by you about, Marie, is how empathically connected and aware you were of the young women who you represented. I mean, you've done incredible things in terms of protecting these young women throughout your life and paid the price for it.
Yes.
And I would love for you to paint that picture for us, focusing on how you knew what to do when you were doing it. Because this is not during Me Too. This is decades before Me Too, where you're the one, you know, basically leading the Me Too before it was Me Too movement in the modeling industry, decades before it became something that was societally accepted and legally supported.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that.
Dive in, huh?
Dive in. I'll interrupt.
You know, I'm going to feel very safe. I've listened to several of your other podcasts. And P.S. and by the way, Harry Lennox, one of the agencies that I worked inside of, Grossman and Jack Talent, Harry Lennox, I don't know if he's still represented by them in Chicago, but it was always such a fun thing for me to walk into the lobby of the agency and like walk in and go, oh my gosh, that's Harry Lennox. Oh he's as charming and handsome and articulate and fun and effervescent in person as he is on that podcast. So I just wanted to say thank you. Bravo. It was fun for me to listen to him and your neuroscientist talking about the medical field, which, you know, me with my throat spasms is an issue with my lack of care. And then also listening to the gentleman, I think his name was David, who works in foster care.
Yeah, exactly.
Advocacy. So the point is that because you had done all those podcasts, I heard a lot of raw material. Because I had listened to your various podcasts and I heard a lot of raw material, I feel safe with you that I can talk about these things and that you allowed them to share their truth. So for me, we have to go back a little further. My mother was a fully functional schizophrenic. And to be ingested, is it ingested? What is it when you're inside of the baby's womb?
Absorbed?
Gestated. I think it's called gestating.
Gestating. Yes.
Okay. When you're gestating inside of the womb of a schizophrenic woman, you learn very early on how to advocate for yourself. But not to a great degree, because you really don't have a lot of faculties when you're by yourself yet and you haven't come out into the world.
Right. So you're not even breathing yet.
Right. And so it's very important that I explain that, because once I popped out of the womb and realized the insanity that I had been brought into the world to be a part of, what's very odd is that you learn a sense of this is normal. This insanity is normal. This kind of mental health crisis is part of a child's upbringing. And I bring that up, Cher, because it's the same kind of thing when I got into the modeling business. To accept the dysfunction and the toxic environment was just part of what you had to do.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a couple examples. When I was the client, Stan Malinowski's studio manager, and I was in Rome, the first trip, I was sexually assaulted by the biggest Italian mogul that was head of the publishing world. And I was 20. It's like, welcome to the world of fashion. And essentially, he told me that if I didn't sleep with him and his editor, who's still alive, Malinowski would never work for any of their magazines again. But fortunately, I had the wherewithal to push him off of me and to finally get out of the hotel room.
Ugh, so disgusting.
Yeah, and I don't want to go into details and freak people out, but the point is that was very traumatic for me. And yet Stan would continue to work for that magazines, I should say, for that publisher.
So, and again, it was a different time, and I know you, and so I think I can safely say it's not as though you're advocating for things staying the same, because you've done more to change this industry than almost anyone else I know. It's more, you're just talking to us about how things were then, so that we can then talk about your journey in helping to change it. One of the things that you just said that was so interesting to me and relates so much to what I'm really fascinated in and write about, and our audience is really fascinated in and reads about, is that you said you accept the dysfunction. This is the thing about Stoicism, and a lot of people misunderstand it. Stoicism is not about controlling the uncontrollable. It's about controlling what is controllable and accepting what is not, and then working over time to change the dynamic between what is and isn't, right? Because nothing is fixed. The uncontrollable doesn't stay fixed in this world, as you know now, 40, 50 years later, very different than back then. But this was back then. There's only so much you could change if you wanted to thrive and survive in that world. And only so much that was in your control. But what was in your control was how you respond to it, right? Was your judgments, your feelings, your emotions. I can't imagine being 20 years old and being in that environment and having this mentor, and everything rests on this mentor who's a good guy. He's not the one harassing you, but people are now using you to get to him, but he needs them, right? And he needs them to continue to succeed. And so by extension, you need them to continue to succeed, but you're not going to give up certain parts about your autonomy, your body. And if you had, I honestly wouldn't have blamed you either. I mean, you would have just been a victim of that pressure of that time. So, but
well, can I say a little more to your point?
Yeah.
About being a victim. Excuse me. I never told Stan during that era what had happened to me, because I was terrified and I didn't know how he would respond.
Yeah.
I mean, I assumed it would be favorable, but to give somebody that information then makes them accountable to, okay, what do I do next? And I'm sorry.
This is so interesting, Marie, because this makes me think of then when you transition to being a leader, how you change the dynamic, your awareness of what these young women were going through and their emotions, your empathy for them, how that changed that dynamic. But I'm going to let you keep talking, because this is just much about strength and resilience and awareness from you right now.
I learned as a child, literally as an adolescent, that my body did not belong to me. And there was a lot of sexual impropriety with other children that were older than me, with adults, male and female. So I learned very early on, when I would go to my parents to communicate things, I would be continuously dismissed. Because keeping in mind, that was the 60s. You didn't talk about children being molested in the 60s.
No, they didn't even have the same kind of rights they have now under the law.
Thank you. I mean, it's just amazing what has been accomplished in this culture, even since you and I have been on the planet. But so it was important for me to explain that as a victim, I learned early on not to say anything. And so with Stan, I didn't say anything. And then when I was the vice president of Elite Chicago, I would then be raped by a top fashion photographer. I didn't say anything to Jane Stewart, my boss at the time. I didn't tell her until the day I quit, which is part of this discussion, why I quit. When my models were coming back from Europe, because since we became Elite, we became, and I'm not discrediting Elite, it's a wonderful brand. It's endured a lot of changes, and God rest his soul, John Casablancas doesn't run the company anymore, and it's more corporate. But the point being is that during that time in the 80s, when I was the vice president of Elite Chicago, Elite Paris and all the Elite affiliate sister agencies got what is called first right of refusal. So if I had a model that they wanted, I had to give them over to that agency. And there was a power over there, Gerald Marie, who then became, from what I was told specifically from several models, that he became to them a sexual predator. Not in a cute, fun, flirty way, but in a very aggressive, violent way. And as they started coming back to America, telling me their stories, confiding in me, but they would also swear me to speak. They would also swear me to secrecy.
Yeah.
Not to betray their trust and to tell anybody their stories. And I still have not told their stories. And because that's their stories to tell. And so also, I did not become clean and sober until 20 years ago and 6 months. Yeah. So it's important to put that into context. I was living the glamour, so to speak, in the 80s of the elite world, doing whatever I wanted, drinking, drugging, participating in a lot of the toxic behavior, not knowing it was toxic behavior because I had become so part of the Kool-Aid, drinking that Kool-Aid. But it wasn't until I accidentally overheard John Casablancas and Gerald Marie having a private conversation with two of the elite New York women, begging them to stop sleeping with the 13 and 14-year-old girls. And they both essentially said they weren't going to stop. And when I heard that, I was so disgusted that I was like, oh, this is much bigger than just these elite Chicago females that are coming home and telling me these stories. This is like a global issue that these men are participating in predatory behavior, because the power dynamic is so significant. You can't say, oh, well, the girls were complicit. No, a 16-year-old girl by herself in Paris, that is not a complicit action.
So you were overhearing, we'll just restate this without the names.
Okay.
So you were overhearing two elite executives, I mean high level people, talking about the fact that two other women were asking them to stop sleeping with the children, right? 13,
yes.
14-year-old. Mm-hmm. And they were saying no. They were refusing.
Correct. And once I heard that, that's when I quit. Wow. I quit, and I quit thinking, and yet I still didn't understand that I was an alcoholic addict at the time. I just knew, like, on a soul level, that I can't, I no matter how like exciting and glamorous and powerful, and I just could not live with myself with that environment. And P.S. and by the way, I stopped as soon as multiple girls were telling me the same story. I stopped sending girls over to Europe, and I would just lie and send them to somewhere else, like whether it be Tokyo or Los Angeles. Like I would find another market for them to go to, so I didn't have to literally human traffic them over to Europe.
So at this phase in your career, and this changes, but at this phase in your career, right up to the time that you quit, you are doing your best to live within the system and protect the young women within the system as much as possible. But at some point, you just realize this is systemic, this is horrendous, and you can't be a part of this system anymore.
Exactly.
And so then what happened?
Well, then I quit and I opened up a little model coaching company called Model Futures. And because I just swore off the elite agency world, I thought, if this is the way all agencies function, I can't be an agent anymore. So I opened up this little company, Model Futures, to act just as a source of information to people. And that lasted 2 years. And before I knew it, I had too many models coming back to me, begging me to open my own agency. And one of the clients that had been hiring me, Mary Boncher, to teach her the fashion business, she had already had her own commercial agency where she booked commercial print and models and actors. She did not really have a true strong fashion department. So that's why she asked me if we wanted to be partners. And that's when I was like, as long as you don't touch the models, your husband doesn't touch the models. Like, I was very clear on the advocacy.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this my way. I'm going to do this the ethical way. I'm going to do this the right way. Right. And so
that was 1992.
Okay.
And Aria became, there was Elite Chicago and a whole bunch of other agencies. And then there was Aria when we first began. And with a year, it was Elite and Aria. Like, we became.
And by the way, look at the difference in the power dynamics now that you are the leader and you are in charge and you are able to change things and you decide to. One of the reasons you became so successful is young women knew that you would protect them.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily something that we get in the industry, but did that always work out for you in a positive way? I mean,
well, in a positive way for me and the girls and mental health and my staff. Yes, it was such a wonderful agency, and we would pay the models on time. There was never any question whether the client was legit. Like, we tried to eradicate all issues with models' complaints from other agencies. And then flash forward, I can't remember what year, it was later 90s, that Michael Gross, this awesome journalist from New York, had written a book called Model, The Ugly Business of Beautiful Women, in which he talked all about, from the beginning of the years of modeling, when it started to happen, what models, how they started in the 20s through Vogue magazine, et cetera. And he brought us through, up until that time, what was current, maybe around 2000. But he had quoted me, he sought me out, quoted me in his book about the abuse that was going on in the business. And he was the first person who acknowledged, and not only acknowledged, said publicly about the abuses that were going on in the business. He was trying to make a change as well. And I was so grateful to him, because when I tried to talk about it with Chicago press, and again, putting it into context, this was the 90s. When I tried to talk about this, people were like, oh, Marie, shut up. Who cares? They're models. Like, they just saw no humanity in the actual persons. They saw them kind of like dolls or automatons. And I was trying to explain, these are human beings. Like, you cannot abuse them. So I tried for many, 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 many years. Thank God Michael had his book. And then I tried to use his book as an opportunity. People were dismissing me still. And then I think it was the year 2000 that the BBC produced this scathing documentary on the business with the same players being focused. And it was they had used undercover hidden video to capture all of these predators talking, bragging about their accomplishments. And it was so scathing that when they aired it in England, within 24 hours, if I recall correctly, there was an injunction to stop the BBC from distributing it anywhere else. And then a lawsuit evolved. And then there was only one person who was willing to testify for the BBC that this goes on, and it was me. And
because you knew what the consequences would be. People know what the consequences would be, because this is the thing, and this is the thing about empathy and stoicism too, is it's not about ignoring those consequences or pretending that they don't exist, or thinking you control the world and you can manifest any sort of end point you want. It's about, I can see down the road what this is going to mean, and I'm not going to be able to control a lot of that. Here's what I can control. I can, and I'm not 20 years old anymore, right? I'm not a terrified 20-year-old kid right now. I'm a leader in this industry. So here you are. And again, this is 20 years ago, right? So, I mean, it was 20 years into your career, but it's 20 years ago. Still decades before the Me Too movement, and before movements like this became protected and popularized. But you provided this testimony because people are suing the BBC for slander.
Yes.
Right? Defamation.
And you were talking about the freedom to speak. So I wanted to testify, all the more reason. And there was a journalist who I didn't know at the time, since she's explained she would be sexually assaulted by one of the predators that was involved in that film, which made it even more personal for her. She was calling me from London. We're arranging flights, and I was going to go over there. And all of a sudden, my staff, my business partners, they're like, no, you can't testify, Marie. Don't do it. Because if you're the only person, all they're going to do is discredit you. Not that there's a lot to say. Even though you're married, you still took drugs and you still drank, right? So you can easily be credited with that kind of money behind the people suing the BBC. So we don't want you to ruin our company. It's a multi-million-dollar corporation, so shut up. Yeah. I talked to my staff about it. They're like, we don't want to work for a rat.
Jesus.
So I didn't go, and I didn't testify. And then all these decades would come by. That same journalist would reach out to me a couple of years ago and say, hi, through Facebook. Hi, do you remember me? I hope you do. I hope you're not mad at me. I'm like, mad at you? I hope you're not mad at me, because I could have testified to help you guys.
Right, but you still cooperated with them. You still gave them lots of information. So you gave them lots of information. You didn't go as far as you would have now, if you know. But you cooperated, and you gave them a ton, and you suffered a lot as a result of that. I mean, you got blacklisted from so many places.
Yes,
tell us
very much ostracized.
Yeah.
It sometimes it's just so passive, like being at a modeling convention where people would be like the agents, we would have lunch or dinner or whatever in the hotel of wherever we were flown to scout. And, you go into the luncheon room where, it's just the VIP agents. It's nobody else. And, there's like little cliques, and, people would save seats for you to come and join them for lunch. The more I started speaking out, people would like put their purses on the chairs so I wouldn't come and sit with them. Or I'd push it a little bit and say, hey, is it okay if I sit here and join you guys? No, we're waiting for the others.
Right.
It was actually very cruel. And so I'm sorry.
So you're going through this, you're suffering the consequences of speaking up. You're not stopping the speaking up. If anything, you keep amping it up. So one of the things that's so interesting to me about this is people think of a movement, and they think of a moment in time, a single news story, or or a single woman speaking up, but really it's decades and decades of people trying to say a little bit, getting hurt, having the courage to say more, getting hurt again, getting back up and saying more, finding another leadership position wherein they can say more, getting hurt again, getting pushed back again, being stifled again, and getting back up and saying it again. This is what it actually looks like in real life. It's not one person suddenly decided to stand up one day and say something and then the industry changed and why didn't people do it sooner? Well, listen, people have been doing it or trying to do it, namely you and several others for decades. So tell me about, let's skip a little bit ahead.
Okay.
I want to make sure we capture your whole story in this podcast before we run out of time. Let's skip a little bit ahead. You're suffering these consequences. How have you spent the last 10 years of your life, 10, 15 years of your life? Are you still, how did you recover from that? How did you rebuild yourself from being an outcast in the industry that you helped build?
I'm still trying to navigate it because I'm a personal manager. And to answer your question, so my last agency position was running Wilhelmina in Chicago when they had an office there. And I think that lasted maybe 5 or 6 months. And I would be fired because I was documenting and calling New York, speaking with the CEO, the vice president, their in-house counsel, talking about a staff member that was verbally abusive, like very verbally abusive to the teen girls. And so instead of firing that person, they fired me because I was making drama where there was no drama necessary. So I was like, okay, I'm just done. I'm just done trying to work for somebody else and continue to be the change inside of corporations that didn't want the change to happen.
Right.
It's like, shut up, Marie, just make us money. Nobody cares about the kids and their tears. Just move on. Lawsuits, don't worry about it. We got in-house counsel. Don't concern yourself. So also what I think is very important is that 20 years ago, I got clean and sober. And that really showed me my accountability and knowing fully well I could not have done better earlier on because I didn't know any better. But as soon as I started learning more about trauma recovery and how I could better be of service to people, I started integrating that more and more. If I couldn't do it inside of the agency, I was doing it just coaching people on the side. Yeah. And so for the past 8 years, I've had Boss Babe Models, which is my one-on-one coaching company. It's
an essential and necessary component of the modeling industry. One of the greatest things I've ever seen. And I highly encourage anyone who listens to this podcast to check it out, because really there you have been the leader so many ways on teaching people who want to be in the industry. They want to be in the industry, right? And it's not 1000% different than it used to be. It is different. A lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. And you're coaching them on how to maneuver their way through it in a way that comports with their value system. Absolutely.
And I'll tell you how it hits me in such a mystical, magical, spiritual way. I was just at a public speaking event here in Orlando over the 4th of July, and I took my PowerPoint presentation into a much more raw direction. And I was a little worried about the producer, but then I thought, I trust her. I know she's all about mental health, so I'll talk about these things. Because if you don't talk about mental health to create a strong foundation for anybody in the entertainment business, you're creating, if you don't talk about it in healthy ways, you're creating a weak foundation. But if you talk about with these kids about eating disorder, drug and alcohol abuse, self-harm, suicide. That's the kind of stuff I started talking about in my PowerPoint presentation about how to brand themselves with integrity and yet maintaining their mental health. Telling them they don't have to hypersexualize themselves. They don't have to be using racial slurs to sound hip. They don't have to use foul language.
Yeah.
And every single person that came up to me afterwards, either right after my talk or throughout the weekend, they were coming up in tears saying, thank you for talking about mental health. Thank you, because nobody else is.
Yeah.
Name one agent in the business, in the world, that's talking about these things. I haven't met them yet, and I've been doing it for over 40 years. So my point is that if I'm not going to do it, it's not going to get done. And I don't mean that like I'm Mother Teresa or anything. It just means like, this is my calling. It's in my DNA. As long as I'm alive, I have to be proactive to try to empower people to prevent trauma that will then in turn, hopefully then prevent suicide. Because I've had 36 friends commit suicide. You know, that's 36 too many.
Of course. Yeah. It's a shocking
So that
number.
back to Boss Babe models, that's what I talk a lot about in Boss Babe models, not only in my coaching one-on-one, which I affectionately call rent an agent. You know, you've got the money and out comes the information. I'll gladly share that, but also in all my social media and everything else that I do. I'm very consistent in my philosophy.
So what I'd love to close on today is throughout these years, this incredibly impactful 50-year career that in many ways is peaking, right? But has also built and transformed an entire industry. What have you learned about yourself, about your ability to understand others, and about your ability to have control over yourself, especially now that you're sober?
For me, I don't think I ever stopped learning about myself, because I keep evolving and changing and try to keep being a better and better person. And that's all the more reason that I want to do like a podcast with you, because it's just as a proclamation that I'm doing the right thing, because of Cher thinks so, then it must be true. Like, it's just a revalidating, right? But I have to be full disclosure. Many years ago, I was taking an acting class from this very prestigious actor here in Chicago. His name is, oh my gosh, how did I just forget Larry? This is embarrassing.
Okay,
anyway,
we'll just restart without the name. You're taking a prestigious acting class in Chicago.
Yes, in Chicago. And when we were done and we were getting reviews at the end of the class session, he came to me and he said, Marie, I think you need to take a class on who you are. And that was before I was clean and sober. And I was like, dang. Like, so he really, that really hit home for me. Here's an acting teacher, and I ended up scouting him and he became part of Grossman and Jack Talent. But the point being is that I'm still learning who I am, because it all goes back to being raised by a schizophrenic. And when you learn to constantly take yourself away from you to try to keep the environment safe from yourself physically, because she was very abusive, physically abusive. But being clean and sober was a huge change for me. And also something that we really don't hear about much anymore is studying quantum physics. You know, just the power of those good vibrations and thinking good thoughts and making things happen for yourself.
So I just want to reemphasize what you just said, because it's so powerful. There's so many trite sayings out there and memes and, you know, just take control of your life or do this and do that. Well, you know what? If you've been born into abuse from the time you were gestating in the womb throughout your professional career, and also have lived in addiction throughout much of your adult life, the control is easier said than done. And what a reminder to all of us that this journey we call life is really not a destination. It's not a place you're trying to get to. It's a thing you practice every day. I loved your honesty during the podcast today. I loved your statement and your concession that, listen, when I was a kid and traumatized and confused and addicted and abused, yeah, I was also complicit in the system. And you're not giving those things to excuse it, but just to help people understand, like that's what was happening at the time. And for me to get to where I am now, which is one of the world's leading advocates of women, and not just against sexual violence and sexual harassment, but against harassment of all kinds in this industry, and still celebrating what's beautiful in the industry and what's meaningful in the industry and what can be so great about the industry, it's really an extraordinary thing. And I will tell you that your work is so essential and important. And I hope that every model has either Marie P. Anderson, because she's the best, or if she's too busy for you, a Marie P. Anderson, maybe without the P, some other version of Marie. But you're the best, and you're the one who's been doing this, and you've paid the price. And this is the other thing to note, is that when we talk about what it's like to be a Stoic in the sense of being virtuous, it is paying the price. And it doesn't mean the first time that shit hit the fan, you stood up and screamed at the top of your lungs and took a moral position, etc. No, it's been a process. It's been a system, and it's been a struggle and a fight. I really think of your life as like a boxing ring. You know, I mean, it's like
Me too.
round one, yeah. Round two, you know, I mean, you're taking punches, you're giving punches, you're moving around, you're dodging, you're landing some good ones, you know, but you don't always get a knockout, you know, certainly not in your first fight. So you're out there and you're still fighting, and now you've got more people on your side of the ring than ever before, and I'm sure that's a welcome change. And I'm sure it's still a lot of fighting in that ring and a lot of getting hit in the face. So thank you for doing that work, for protecting the next generation, and as much as you could, the last generation of young women and men in this industry. You're amazing, and your ability to have Stoic empathy is truly awe-inspiring. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story.
It's my pleasure.
Wow, that was something. Joining me now is my amazing producer, Alex Waite. Hi, Alex.
Hello, Cher. How are you?
I am so energized from that conversation and really excited to talk to you about it. What did you think? What struck you the most about that conversation, about that interview?
Oh my gosh. I mean, picking one thing, it feels almost impossible.
No,
I mean, what struck me first was she came into our little Zoom meeting here, and immediately it was one of the warmest, most fun and energetic people that I've been able to talk to in this sort of one of the most fun and warm, delightful people that I've been able to experience in this sort of setting.
Yeah.
And then when the interview started, she was able to quickly just change gears and go into her passionate advocate side of her. And I just thought that she just impressed me on so many levels throughout the interview. And I remember I was sending you the timestamp notes of how long the interview was going, and I was terrified that you were going to be that you were going to think I was mad.
Minutes.
I know. I didn't want the interview to ever end. And so being the one to tell you that eventually it had to end, I felt like such a terrible person. So,
wow. You're just doing your job. I am so glad you brought up Marie's ability to be passionate, steadfast, and, this serious advocate while still being incredibly warm and engaging. I mean, it's really important to actually point it out. Her ability to have that level of control over her tone, over, and you guys can't see what Marie's face looks like because we're on audio right now, although Alex is trying to talk me into releasing these in video. So, hey, maybe you are seeing this in video right now at some point in the future. But her ability to just control her facial expressions. And one of the things that I think is really amazing about people who know how to do this is that they just allow their face to have the corresponding expression to whatever emotion they're feeling. So if they're saying, hi, excited to be on the show, right? They look happy and excited. And if they're talking about sexual abuse, they don't look happy and excited. And that is perfectly appropriate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's just amazing. It's not about knowing when to smile. It's just about being authentic with your feelings and engaging in a warm way, but also taking your expression of tone and voice and face seriously, just as much as your words,
And I think that what you said there really encapsulated it, because it's not that she was putting on the right show. She was just being authentically herself. And it really puts a lens on a lot of the stories that she was telling about how she was being told to act a certain way or to think a certain way. And she was able to have the awareness to recognize that, one, this is wrong. And then not only believe, steadfastly believe in that, but then act on it. And so what you're describing and how she acted during the interview really speaks to and shows her ability to have done that throughout her career, standing up for so many people.
So hard. I mean, so hard in today's world, but in every world, really. Absolutely amazing. I mean, she's a fighter.
Absolutely.
I mean, she just keeps getting punched in the face and keeps getting back up. It's incredible. Absolutely amazing. Did you know she's actually a black belt in karate?
She's a black belt on top of everything else?
Yeah. She could actually kick our butts. I mean, actually.
That actually
not
doesn't
my butt,
really surprise me.
I'm lovely, but maybe yours.
Mine probably, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I have to say that was such an amazing experience. And guys, don't forget to check out Boss Babe Model. And I genuinely hope that everyone has a Marie P. Anderson in their life or considers becoming a Marie P. Anderson as they gain leadership and power in their life. So cool. So cool. I invite you to like and follow us on Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Amazon, Spotify, all of the various podcast apps and all the things cluttering up space on your phone. Click the like button. Give us a little nod. We live and die by the sword of Amazon and Spotify. This has been a really, really special episode of the Stoic Empathy podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Marie, for being with us today.
Hi, my name's Alex, and I'm the founder of Epics, where we produce podcasts with purpose. I started Epics to help amazing people and organizations create an accessible, engaging podcast for the stories that need to be heard so that we can continue to make a greater positive impact on our world. Epics Productions will fully produce a professional podcast for your truly dynamic stories. We will launch, produce, and edit a podcast specifically for your organization that is centered around your message and mission to help you or your organization capture the attention of the next generation of activists and philanthropists. Go to epicsproductions.com to learn more and follow all of the shows in the Epics Podcast Network to hear more epic stories. Should Out Loud was produced by Epics Productions, where we create podcasts with purpose. Hi, my name's Alex, and I'm the founder of Epics. I believe that the foundation of hate and discrimination in our world comes from a lack of understanding of those who are different from us. Check out my show, the Epics Podcast, where we step out of our comfort zones to hear the stories of others so that we may better understand them and be a part of making real positive change in the world.
New episodes drop every Friday. Go to epicspodcast.com to go listen and subscribe, or go to epicsproductions.com to learn more about starting your own podcast. And be sure to follow all the shows in the Epics Podcast Network to hear more epic stories.